A big welcome to all of you across the country for our initial podcast of the Across the Sky podcast, brought to you by Lee Enterprises. I'm Joe Martucci, based at the Press of Atlantic City in New Jersey. Joined with me is our all-star team across the country here. We have Sean Sublett in Richmond, Kirsten Lang in Tulsa, and Matt covering the Midwest. Guys, I feel like we're best friends already, and we've only known each other for about 6 months, you think?
We've had a lot of meetings together.
We have had. Yeah, this is Sean. We've had a lot of meetings here over the past several months, but we're having a real good time. There's a lot of new things to do here, but we all come from slightly different meteorological backgrounds, all coming together in this new enterprise through the Enterprises, and having a good time building something new, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, and it's good to be with everybody here. And just to recap, and then we'll dive into everybody. This is going to be a podcast where, yes, we're going to talk about weather, but we want to talk about stories. We want to talk about emotions. We want to talk about things that kind of, make your heart race when we're talking about weather, whether it's good things or maybe not so great. But we're going to do this at least once every other week for now. And we're going to do about 10 to 15 minutes of us bantering, talking about a certain topic that's in the headlines and the news. Then we're going to have a guest come on. Usually it's going to be about the topic we talked about in the beginning, and then we'll come back for some segments. So why don't we start off this first episode with everybody talking about themselves, how they got here, and what they've been most excited about so far, talking with everybody in your region that you're from. We'll start with Matt, since Matt's covering our largest area. He's going from, what do we got, Matt? Indiana to part of Minnesota into Nebraska?
Yeah, 6 states total. So let's list them off here. Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, and yes, Minnesota as well. So in total, I cover the 32 properties that Lee has across the Midwest. And by properties, I'm referring to newspapers, websites, social media accounts. So there's always something to talk about from a weather perspective, which is great because, I love weather. I mean, that's my background. Grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and as many meteorologists can say, as a kid, I was the kid who was standing in the garage and parents had to hold back from running out into the thunderstorm. And I wanted to watch the rain coming down. So I always had an interest in weather. And by the time I got to high school, I was like, yeah, I want to be a meteorologist. That's what I want to do. So got my undergraduate degree from the University of Texas at Austin, a general science degree, a geological science degree, because I really liked UT, but they didn't have a meteorology program. So then I was like, all right, I took a couple meteorology classes at UT, but then learned about Mississippi State's program for broadcast meteorology. So then after I was done at UT, I went over to Mississippi State University in Starkville, Mississippi, and spent 2 years there and got my master's degree in broadcast meteorology. And then while I was in school, I had a chance to intern at CNN and the Weather Channel and worked in the weather departments there. And that was great getting to learn from these people who have so much experience. I learned so much at those two internships. They had a local internship at the NBC station in Austin as well. So got a lot of learning under my belt just in college. Then my first job, did want to start out in the TV weather world, was in Richmond, Virginia, actually Sean's territory. I spent a year there at the NBC station, WWBT in Richmond, Virginia. And I was their fifth meteorologist and also a reporter, a multimedia journalist. So I was kind of filling in all spots. Anybody on the weather team was off, I was there and always supporting any kind of severe weather coverage that was going on. And then my next job was a interesting job that was kind of like what I'm doing now, in a sense that I was covering such a large area. My next job was still working in TV, but I was working for two different stations. So I was based in Cincinnati, Ohio at the Fox station there, but I was working remotely for the Fox station in Ottumwa, Iowa, which is about an 8-hour drive away. But I was already doing this remote coverage. And I was their chief meteorologist for the Fox station in Ottumwa, Iowa. So anytime there was tornadoes or severe weather in Iowa, even though I was in Cincinnati, I was covering it and doing social media updates as well. And then helping out again on the team in Cincinnati. Anytime somebody was off, I was filling in, helping with severe weather coverage there. And then my next job after a couple of years in Cincinnati went back to Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. So cities there, McAllen, Texas, Brownsville, Texas, but in general, it's just referred to as the Valley. Deep South Texas, right on the U.S.-Mexico border. Some really hot, humid weather there, but also got the chance to cover Hurricane Hannah when that hit in 2020. So covered that. That's kind of the biggest, wildest weather they see down in the valley. So spent 3 years there. And then after, my contract was coming up at the ABC station, KRGV, I realized that a lot of the interaction I was getting, and I was spending a lot of time doing digital updates, posting stuff for Facebook and Twitter. And I was getting a lot of interaction there. And I would talk to people when I was out and they say, oh, I see you on Facebook, or I saw you on Snapchat, or, they were seeing my digital content more than they were actually seeing me on TV, and I was spending hours each morning on air as the weekday morning meteorologist at KRGV. More people were seeing my digital stuff. And so then it just kind of occurred to me, it's like, why can't I just have a job where I just do digital weather and I just post videos to the websites and post stuff to Facebook and Twitter, since that's where it seems like most of the audience is growing, because we always get updates that not as many people are watching the newscasts on TV anymore, and they're getting the content online. It's like, well, why don't I just get that online content? Why can't I just have a digital only job? So then I found this opening at Lee, and I'm covering a huge area, but it's all digital. So I'm having fun with it so far.
Awesome, man. You have a lot of experience bouncing around the country, and now you're based in the Midwest. And I know you're not necessarily a cold guy growing up in San Antonio, Texas. So how was your first winter in Chicagoland?
Right. Yeah. So I'm actually in Chicago, which is kind of a good place to be since I'm covering Midwest weather in the biggest city in the Midwest. And this was definitely the coldest winter I've ever experienced being in Chicago. But I've learned that as long as you spend most of your time inside, you can manage.
You can manage through. So I want to go to Kirsten next, because Matt and Kirsten actually went to the same high school. There's I don't know how many thousand high schools there are in the country, and we have two of them that are working in this 4-person team. So I don't think you guys connected with each other, but Kirsten, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, such a small world, right? Reagan Rattlers, Reagan High School, that's where we went. So Matt and I, yeah, we didn't know each other then. I think I'm a little older than Matt, but I, I grew up in San Antonio, obviously, and then went to high school there, as I just mentioned. After high school, I went up to Baylor University. And, it was one of those things I kind of bounced around. I always liked the weather. When I was in San Antonio, I shadowed chief meteorologist at one of the NBC stations there. Jennifer Broom, very nice lady. And then when I went to Baylor, I was like, oh, I think I'm going to be pre-med, even though I hate blood and the sight of blood. I don't know why I did that. But, started with that and then quickly moved over to journalism and communications and did a lot of internships in all fields, and still just kept going back to weather. Really enjoyed it. While I was there at Baylor, I interned. Actually, I went out to New York for a semester and interned at Good Morning America. Had a great time doing that. That was pretty cool to do something on a national level, but also realized that if I was going to live in a city like New York, I had to make some money because it's really expensive out there. But came back and I decided, I wanted to be a meteorologist, but if I was going to do that, I needed to know what I was talking about. So after I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in journalism and communications, I went for a second bachelor's. Actually, it's kind of funny. I think I have enough undergraduate degrees for 4 people, or hours, I should say, because then I went and I got a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology from University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio. And while I was there, I got my first job on air in Victoria, Texas. It was super small, but it was great. It was a great place to go and kind of get some kinks out, And from there, I went out to Knoxville, Tennessee, and it was a big jump for me, having only lived in Texas, but I'd spread my wings and left and went to Knoxville and spent a couple years there. From Knoxville, then I jumped out to Denver, Colorado. So I always say I went from the Smoky Mountains to the Rocky Mountains, and then kind of wound up right smack in the middle in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But what's been neat, I've been a meteorologist for over 10 years now, but what's been really cool about it is that all the places I've lived in have all had really unique weather, and it's really fun to be able to forecast weather in all different parts of the country. But Tulsa definitely takes the cake with the most intense weather, I guess I would say, most active weather, even though there was a lot in Denver. Don't be fooled, a lot went on out there. But in fact, I remember one time I was forecasting and there was a winter storm warning out in the mountains, and there was a tornado warning out in the plains, like all in one day. So it was kind of nuts. But I've been here in Tulsa for 6 years, and and like Matt said, what's the first thing you do in the morning? Usually when you wake up, you don't turn on the TV or grab your newspaper quite as much. It's you grab your phone and you look at your phone next to your bed, and you want to see, you see what's going on. And so even in television, that was something that we always did, was made sure that we were posting digital. And you just start thinking about it, and you're like, that's where people live. A lot of times they live in the digital world. And so this has been a really cool job to be able to kind of live there and connect with people there. And one of the things that I really enjoy about it too is the creativity that Lee has given us, or at least I should say the ability to be as creative as we want to be with our roles, this podcast being one of them. And so, we're really excited. I'm speaking for all of us, but we're really excited about this and about being able to connect with all of you guys on this platform as well.
So Kirsten, so since you're the only one who hasn't had to move for this job, right? You were already in Tulsa, and then you got here with, at the Tulsa World. What's the reaction been like from people when, I know you were in TV and then you were kind of away for a couple of months. Now you're back with Tulsa World. What's that reaction been like?
It's been great. I mean, people have been really excited. I think for 5 years, I was a morning meteorologist here at one of the news stations. And then, like you said, took a little break there, did some freelancing out in Oklahoma City for a while. And people continue to follow me on my social accounts. And they kept saying, I wish you'd come back. When are you coming back? And so when I finally was able to make the announcement, I think a lot of people were really excited. And even in the community, again, this is all digital. It's in print too, of course, but this is, we put a lot of effort and a lot of time into the digital world. And I've had a lot of people come up to me in the community, and they're excited to see me back doing what I love doing, but then also to kind of see this new platform that the Tulsa World has launched and get their weather from me that way as well.
No one can see this because we're on audio, but you're sitting in your brand new studio that you built as well. So when you check that out, they actually did a really nice job of creating a studio with a green screen and everything over there. Next, we'll turn to Sean. Now, Sean and I have known each other for a couple of years before he took the job here, but I also feel like Sean knows everybody, so I don't feel that special. Sean is working at the Richmond Times-Dispatch. He actually worked in Jersey for a couple of years, so there's the connection. But Sean, I'll turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Joe, thank you. And yeah, I think we met in person a little more than 2 years ago at American Meteorological Society conference. I think right before the pandemic hit. I think it was in Boston.
It was in Boston. It was right before.
Because of the cool work that you're doing. I'm going to brag on you a little bit because once, before we talk about me, but once was it WMGM went belly up there in South Jersey, there was no local media doing weather in South Jersey. And that, I think, what you're doing there is tremendous for the people living in South Jersey, whether it's inland or at the shore. I know you don't want to talk about yourself but so much, but you're doing fabulous work there, brother.
Well,
I appreciate it.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
As for me, I was born and raised here in Richmond, Virginia, and it was really more winter storms, believe it or not, that got me more interested in weather. When I was a kid, it was 1970s, and it was a little colder time in the Middle Atlantic, and there was a lot more snow back then, frankly. So snowstorms actually got me interested in weather. Then as we got into the 80s and my teenage years, I got more interested in tropical systems and thunderstorms and the like. So off I go to Penn State, did my undergrad and then my graduate work there. Then after that, I very briefly worked as what people in DC will call Beltway bandits, basically a government contractor. I was working on the grounds of NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, which sounds way more exciting than it actually was. I was writing code for another primary investigators project. So the code was basically pulling water vapor data from a satellite and making it look pretty for pictures. It was called IDL, was the forecast language. Anywho, I didn't like being on the Beltway that much, so I got an opportunity to go down to Roanoke, Virginia, back to Virginia, although 3 hours west of my hometown, to do weekend weather. This was in the mid 90s at the NBC affiliate there. Stayed there for 8 years, bumped up to do the morning news there. And then, as they say in television, you haven't made it until you've been fired. So I was let go, or technically my contract was not renewed. They said, no, thank you. And then I went, as I say, across the street to the ABC affiliate, which was in neighboring Lynchburg, Virginia. So the television market is Lynchburg and Roanoke, so basically southwestern Virginia. So I worked there for the next 11 years, mornings, then ultimately moving into the evening newscasts in 2009. So I did that for a few more years. And then I kind of sensed that climate change was going to become more of an important thing in the news, in the national conversation, the international conversation, in the mid-2010s. So then I stepped out of television after 20 years of being on the air. I took a job up there in Jersey, Joe, with Climate Central. They're a nonprofit and nonpartisan, non-advocacy group doing science and communications about climate change, literally across the street from Princeton University, not affiliated with the university, but a lot of people on the governing board are professors there. So I was there for 6 years, and that's where you and I first met, Joe, talking about climate change, how to work some of that into forecasts and reporting in a way that, is tricky because not everybody wants to talk about it. You want to talk about it in a way that's informative, that is scientific, but so many people get emotionally pushed one way or the other when the topic comes up. So one of the things we were trying to do was communicate it or tell the story in a way that was scientific but important to all the meteorologists across the country and reporters across the country through our Climate Matters program. But then as we got toward the middle part of 2021, and we're still having a pulse of what's going on in the weather space, and I kind of missed the opportunity to come to be back at home, be back in Virginia, those kinds of things. And this opportunity came along with Lee Enterprises and the Richmond Times-Dispatch, which is my hometown daily. And frankly, look, it's been a little tough for newspapers. That's why we're really kind of branching up into the digital space, because we all know digital is frankly where there is growth, right? So I think that's why, at least for some reason, all of us are here, because we see this as a very important opportunity to grow something and to build something. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, in addition to being in my hometown. And it's great to be back in my hometown. So that's my little story. And I've been here since December as we continue to build this thing forward. So Joe, thanks. It's been great meeting you a few years ago, and now working with you is just fabulous.
I concur. When the position was opened, I made sure that I tried to do everything I could. Not that I can do that much, but everything I could to make sure that Sean was still a spot. Sean, I really like having you on the team because I like you as a person, one, but also two, you're very involved with the American Meteorological Society and working a lot with climate change. Just kind of curious in like maybe 15 or 30 seconds, like how have you seen climate change coverage change since when you first started in television to when you left television and then now?
Yeah, I mean, there just wasn't that much coverage of it at all when I first started in television. Then as we got into about 2010, 2011, you started to see it bubbling up. And then 2014, 15, it started to expand a little bit, but still very, very heated, if you will. No pun intended, but it's still a very divisive topic. And a lot of newsrooms were kind of hesitant to cover it because of that. But I think in these last 2 to 3 years in particular, there have been enough events out there, whether it's Hurricane Harvey with all the flooding in Texas, and other high profile events like the very souped up wildfire seasons in the West. We've had some very intense flash flooding events in high population areas. And frankly, that's going to get more press. Like we had what was the ice storm last year, y'all? I forget.
Ida, yeah.
Yeah. And the remnants of that came into Pennsylvania, New York, and did the phenomenal flash flooding in New York City. So that's going to get a lot of attention. So it's these very high profile, high impact events hit large populations. It gets more into the news cycle. People ask questions, and that's an opportunity to explain the science of what we know versus what we don't know. And that's always a challenge, right? Because we're trying to be as scientifically accurate as possible. And we all here know that there are people that are yelling from all different sides, trying to get their information or misinformation out there. So we do our best to try to work through that and say, this is where the science is. These are where the projections tell us, depending on the decisions we make in the next 1 year, 2 year, 10 years of where things could be for our kids and then our grandkids. So we see a lot more coverage than we had in the past, much more coverage of a scientific aspect of climate change and then what that means to the individual people in the audience.
Awesome, Sean. I know we said we were going to keep this about a half hour. I think it's our first episode. We're going to get through the kinks here. I think Sean's keeping a little bit of time. He says, we're at 21 minutes already, but we have so much good information to talk about. I didn't even talk about myself yet. Should I just skip myself? Should we just go on to the next thing? I mean, I've been here long enough.
Tell us a little bit, tell us about your journey, at least a little bit, Joe, because you are the most Jersey person I know doing weather, and I love it.
Well, I appreciate that, Sean. Actually, you remind me of a tweet that I put out. My favorite part of that American Meteorological Society conference in 2020 was when Sean told me that was the most Jersey talk he ever heard. So I wear it as a badge of honor.
Fabulous.
I'm Joe Martucci. I'm meteorologist for the Press of Atlantic City. I am the old man of the group since I have been here for 5 years now, started in 2017. We actually at the Press, and I'm not saying this in a braggadocious way, but we actually started a meteorologist position here, and that really helped lead to a lot of this. Even before me, there was a meteorologist, his name was Dan Skeldon, somebody I look up to. He actually started here in 2014. He was the real like Lewis and Clark pioneer here when our local TV station, our NBC station in the area shut down. So what Chris Worrell, who was our executive editor at the time, did was hire the chief meteorologist, Dan Skeldon, to come to the press and do videos and do articles and, kind of be that personality and be that presence and be that weather person in the area. He was very popular. He was already here for a number of years. So anyway, a little bit about myself. I was born in New Jersey, raised in New Jersey, went to school in New Jersey, and have only worked in New Jersey. So I don't have these traveling across the country stories like everybody else, unfortunately. But I have moved around the state. So I have been interested in weather for as long as I can remember. In fact, one of the first things I ever remember is being at my grandma's house. I was about 4 or 5 years old. And Al Roker was on the TV. Now, Al Roker at the time was on local news in New York. So we were watching. I remember either my aunt or my grandma saying, like, look, Joe, it's going to be you when you get older. I remember thinking to myself, like, yeah, that is going to be me when I get older. So I always knew I was interested in weather. Actually, when I was in high school, we had a meteorology class, which was great because that was my first time with some kind of like formal learning of meteorology. The downside to that was that everybody knew I liked weather, so they wanted to cheat off of me in school. So that was my high school story. But went to Rutgers right here in Jersey, graduated with a meteorology degree. We also had a TV program there called Weather Watcher. And I bring this up because we're kind of coming full circle with some things, but I was the student manager for that. We had about 45 people, and we actually helped to get a WSI graphic system. We're going to talk about this probably in a couple of minutes, but we helped to get a graphic system. Now, I never got to see it because I graduated by the time we got it, but we got it. So anyway, I actually started my first job, my first job. I worked for about a month as a kind of like a temp to hire as a television reporter for a local news station here. But it didn't work out, and that's fine. There was no weather. There was no weather with it. It was just kind of testing it out, tried it, whatever. A couple months later, actually, I took a job that was all weather, but not really working much in media. I worked as a consulting meteorologist for a company called WeatherWorks, which is in the northwest corner of the state. So we had clients like NASA Goddard, like Sean said earlier. We had clients like the Philadelphia Eagles, the New York Jets, a bunch of paving companies, contractors, snowplow operators, you name it. But we did some radio there, and I worked in radio. I worked in sales. I worked in social media. And when this opportunity at the press came along, when Dan left, I applied for the job. Actually went to Italy for the first time in my life, got the email that was like, hey, Joe, love your stuff. We want you to come in for an interview. I said, well, I'm a little bit busy. I'm across the pond here in Italy. So we interviewed in my hotel room in Rome. And then the day I got back, jet lagged and everything, drove down to the press, and the rest was history. So it's really great to be here for two reasons. One is that there's tremendous, like at least on a personal level, tremendous creative flexibility to do what you want. I think we've all kind of felt the same way, Sean, Kirsten, and Matt, to really do weather as we see fit. But the second thing is for us here in our corner of the state, and we're centered around Atlantic City, is weather matters a lot here. When you look at the economics of our region, the two things that stand out is tourism and farming, and I'll include fishing within that farming as well. Both of them highly dependent on the weather. So people are weather savvy here. It's a weather savvy area. So it's great to kind of feed into that. And it's great to be with a team of four. We had John Boyer, who was before Sean at the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And we did some work together. He was a great guy. And, we actually talked not too long ago, but to be with this team here when we're all kind of pushing forward and coordinating, and a couple of shout outs, Buzz Keogh, our executive editor, for making this happen. Paige Mudd, who's our news director in the East region, for really overseeing this. Tim Kelly, Dean Hoffmeyer, a bunch of people for really making this special. I mean, we are kind of the first people to do this in we'll say a video first format or video audio format. Capital Weather Gang at the Washington Post does a fantastic job, works in the written word. We're trying to do that and more in the video and audio realm. So I know that was more than 2-3 minutes, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Well, it's a good story, Joe. Yeah. Before we toss to break here, and I neglected to mention this before, but John Boyer did work here at the Times-Dispatch before I did, and he really laid a lot of groundwork, a lot of foundation, some of the stuff that I'm building on. So thank you for bringing that up very much. He's done tremendous work. Joe, back to you, man.
Usually our podcast will probably last about this long, but we're taking a break at about the half-hour mark. We come back, we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about what you guys can expect from us. We'll touch on a few other points as well. And you guys are listening to the first episode of the Across the Sky podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to the Across the Sky podcast. I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci here at the Press of Atlantic City. We are with the Lee Weather Team, Lee Enterprises, parent company of Press of Atlantic City, where I am, Richmond Times-Dispatch, where Sean is, Tulsa World, where Kirsten is, and a whole bunch of locations where Matt Hollander is in the Midwest. So this is what we want to do with the podcast. Talking about a little bit earlier. We'll just, when we go forward in time, it's going to come out every other week. We're going to hear from you guys. We'll probably increase it to once a week at some point. But we want to talk about topics that really, either stimulate a conversation, or we're going to talk about stories that you as the listener, really can follow along in your head to, kind of make you zone out for a couple of minutes and hear those stories. We already have some ideas of what we're going to do as we go forward in time. Definitely want to talk about hurricane forecasts and the hurricane season. That's going to be starting pretty soon, June 1st in the Atlantic Hurricane Basin. We'll talk about allergies. Everyone loves to talk about allergies. We'll talk about that, but we want to get some people who can tell some pretty cool stories too. Maybe some storm chasing stories. We'll see what happens with that. So, let's talk about not just the podcast right now, but in terms of the work that we're doing here. And I'll start with Sean here. How do you see weather at the Times-Dispatch, and what do you think we're going to be doing as a group together?
Yeah, I think one of the cool opportunities we're going to have with this podcast, and even aside from the podcast, is when there is a bigger national or regional story. Let's say when we get into August or September, and we do have a tropical system that is taking shape in the Atlantic, and most of the East Coast is keeping an eye on it. That's something you and I can take to our viewers up and down, or readers and listeners all up and down the East Coast, whether it's from the Carolinas all the way up to New England, something you and I have been following for a long, long time. And I think there's a lot of value in that. We also do the written word in our print versions. We continue to produce video very regularly. We do something here called the A1 Weather Minute, where it's 60 seconds, all the weather you need heading out the door or right before you go to bed, something that's quick and punchy and gets you what you need to know. That's one of the benefits of us being able to do digital. So I think when we look broader at the podcast, I think there's a lot of opportunity to stay topical. I mean, look, we all know all weather is local, but there are certain stories that have broad brush appeal regionally or nationally. I mean, we're getting into severe weather season. We've already had a tornado warning here in the last week and a half. And I know, Kirsten, you're in Oklahoma. You're going to get some tornado warnings. I mean, Matt, you're in the upper Midwest, Chicago. You serve several states. You're going to be covering severe weather. And Joe, in central South Jersey, certainly they get severe weather too. So, we could talk about tornadoes and how to react to tornadoes, or why do tornadoes do this or that? And in addition to things like, well, this is why we expect the hurricane season to be the way it is. And this is what we see is happening to pollen, which does affect almost everybody, especially east of the Front Range of the Rockies. And we want to answer viewer questions, as it were, viewer emails. What we get we're all on social media, right? So when somebody asks us, hey, what about that thing that I saw? What causes that? Maybe we'll do a little grab bag answering viewer questions and the things like that. So that's kind of the things that really excite me for broadening our scope in the print word, the written word, video, audio, and the things like that. So Kirsten, how do you kind of see it playing out from Oklahoma?
You kind of touched on a couple of things there with the severe weather. Of course, that's a huge component to Oklahoma, being right down in the middle of the country, in Tornado Alley, if you will. And so, of course, what we're planning to do is be there whenever that occurs. The daily forecasts, like we're all doing at our prospective properties, having those out every day to help people plan. And then also, diving into more in-depth questions and stories. Every Wednesday, we have what's called a Weather Wednesday column here, where I'm kind of diving a little bit more into the science behind certain things. So this past Wednesday, it was what causes wind to form. Wednesday before that, I was talking about hail development and how that happens, kind of science behind all of that. And then on Sundays, we do Q&As. And so people will send me their questions. I've had a lot of really good feedback from individuals and try to get to all of them. We'll be hitting those on Sundays. This past Sunday was a great one. Somebody asked me, we have an interstate that kind of slices diagonally through the viewing area, or the DMA here.
35.
44. Which one did you say? 35? No, 35 is vertical. This one is kind of at a diagonal.
Gotcha.
And somebody said, hey, why does it seem like all of the tornadoes and severe storms just travel right up I-44? And so, we got into prevailing winds and all of the details on how storms are driven, and talk to people about paying attention to those right movers, but we've had pretty good questions come up. A lot of people and a lot of people everywhere. I think everywhere people are interested in weather. And you have the big stories and you have kind of the more local stories. And so it's fun to be able to connect with people and answer their questions.
Yeah. I like to call Matt the workhorse over here, because he just keeps going and going and going. So many places, so many videos, Matt. So we know you're doing lots of videos. Tell us about it. And are you doing anything else?
Yeah, I crank out lots of forecasts. So, I try and do these regional videos. So since I have 32 different communities to cover, I group them into groups. So like all the Nebraska properties, all the Nebraska cities get a forecast for Nebraska, which can be difficult sometimes because I cover from Scottsbluff to Omaha, and what's happening in the western part of the state can sometimes be very different from the eastern part of the state. Sometimes it's pretty similar, but there's more often than not some big variation. So wherever the biggest weather is, I kind of focus in and make sure that people are prepared for high impact weather, but make sure everybody gets an idea of what to expect. And I'm focused in on the short term, and that's really what I'm all about, is giving people like the most important information. Like, this is what you need to know, rather than, taking up too much of people's time. Like, get to the nuts and bolts. This is the most important. This is, talk about this is what you need to know to be prepared for your day. So lots of forecast videos. When there's really big severe weather or a big winter storm, finally we're getting away from that, though we're still dealing with snow in the Midwest, but no more big winter storms.
April in Chicago's winter.
Oh yeah, no, there's still lots of rain snow mixes, and it's unseasonably cold right now in the Midwest. So, ready for a warm up. But anytime there's something really big, then the next step is doing some live streams, and kind of like, like we see on TV, this live severe weather coverage. We're gonna be able to do that too, because we have the same technology that television stations are using. And that's something that's really new, I think, to the newspaper world, is using the weather company, what we call is this Max software. And that basically is how we present the weather. What you see, a lot of what you see digitally or on television, are the graphics that we can present. And now we have access to that. Fortunately, that's been part of the process here at Lee, is purchasing that software, which is really the top of the line. It's the gold standard out there. And that's what we have access to now, to give the highest quality, not just daily forecasts and videos, which we're already doing, but eventually being able to do some severe weather coverage too. But I think what excites me, I'm always in a grind here in the Midwest, because there's so many places to cover. What excites me about this podcast is I can step back, slow down a little bit, and kind of look at weather outside of the Midwest and what the big story is nationally. And, really dive into some topics. Again, maybe talking about climate change, talking about hurricane season, kind of what is the big national story, rather than what's going on in all the different little communities that I'm covering, in the daily forecast. I'm looking forward to like really diving in deep and talking about, some more things that we can really get into discussion about and kind of what the big national story is. And that's what excites me most about the podcast, is kind of taking a break from the daily grind to really go in depth on topics.
Well, I'm glad we're all in agreement that we really want to do this podcast. So that's a good thing. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. And at least for me, the max system, and you brought it up, Matt, is really a game changer. I mean, this is not even kidding, like top of the line stuff. No other newspaper company in the country has this, maybe even the world, who knows, but at least in the country. And we're able to bring you information that's detailed, that's fast, that's forecast oriented. And we can do more than just forecast too with this kind of stuff. So, and that's a big shout out to our people who are making this happen at Lee, for really making that possible. For me, it's really a continuation of what I've been doing with a couple of tweaks, working with you guys on stories, the podcast, but, we're always doing 2 videos a day. We still got that. We're doing school visits. We're still doing that. We're still writing about, whether it's the drought that we got here in South Jersey, or whether it's about a series on coastal flooding in Atlantic City. We're doing all that still. And we're just doing it on a higher level that we have our weather team here, and we got everybody with our graphics that's rolling along as well. So I'd like to say, and this is more for Kirsten and Matt, I think we've come a long way since we first met each other back in October. Sean wasn't with us yet. And Sean actually hasn't met anybody on this podcast in person yet, but we're going to hope to change that. But I think we've come a long way, guys, since the early part of October.
Yeah, in October, it was a lot of still planning, hoping. I think there were a lot of crossed fingers on some things, especially with obtaining, this graphic system that we have now. But we definitely have, and I think with all of that, things have evolved too. And I think it's looking great.
Yeah. Where are we having our next meeting at? We did Matt's territory this time. Where are we going next? We going to Tulsa next?
Yeah, come on down. Come next week when we're supposed to have some severe weather.
Ooh, storm chasing. I like it.
She just wants us to come so we can help her out. But actually, you know what, Ellen, just real quick side note, we are going to help each other out. In fact, Sean's helped me out a couple of days this is one of the perks that, like, if I'm not in, Sean's going to fill in for me on our website. If Matt's not in, we'll try to replicate Matt's workhorse progress. We'll draw straws on that one, but we're going to be able to help each other out. So, if you're in Jersey and you're seeing me, of course, you'll see some of Kirsten, you'll see some of Sean, you'll see some of Matt. So we're all going to kind of work this interchangeably.
Yeah, I mean, I've already worked a little bit for Joe, which is fun, having spent some time in New Jersey. I do have a rudimentary understanding of New Jersey. Of course, Joe, I was on your podcast a little while ago talking about whether or not there is a Central Jersey.
Did you work in Central Jersey, Sean?
Well, it depends on whether or not there's a Central Jersey now, doesn't it?
Well, I'm asking you. That's why I'm asking you. I was just curious to hear your thoughts.
For my money, there is a Central Jersey. My understanding is that people in North Jersey think that everything, if it's not North Jersey, it's South Jersey. But for my money, spending some time in North Jersey and South Jersey, I think there's a Central Jersey around Princeton, Trenton. But that's just me.
I agree with you.
I'm a Virginia boy, so I really don't have a dog in that fight, so to speak.
You have the Tidewater.
Tidewater used to be a very common name, but when we look at the metropolitan area, the Norfolk, Portsmouth, Virginia Beach, it's all kind of Hampton Roads.
Oh, Hampton Roads. Okay. Now,
we were talking about this earlier about names and where do you draw this line? We had some discussions about how to pronounce that city in southeastern Virginia, Norfolk.
Yes, Norfolk.
I've always pronounced it Norfolk, and I think that's the most common. Some people say Norfolk, and then we know you're not from around here when you say Norfolk, because that's the place in Nebraska, or the legacy pronunciation is Norfolk.
That you got a wicked accent.
But when somebody says Norfolk, they've lived there for a very long time.
This reminded me, and this is actually for Kirsten. So I actually thought, in Oklahoma, there's a place called, I thought it was Boise City, but it's called Boise City. You familiar with what I'm talking about? Like way out in the panhandle?
Oh, no. I mean, that's a little past what I do. There's a lot of little towns like that. Actually, my favorite one, it's spelled Miami, but that's not how you pronounce it. It's Miami. And when I first moved here, they were like, do not say Miami, Oklahoma. They will laugh at you.
That's awesome. Now, what other cities have y'all mispronounced on the first time you did some kind of weather, and you got called to the carpet immediately.
When I started this job, since I'm covering all of Nebraska, I got a good overview of like, okay, these are the cities you're going to be covering. But one I missed was I said Beatrice, Nebraska, and that was very wrong because it is actually pronounced Beatrice, Nebraska. Of all the things that I've done out and sent out, I got more feedback on that from people in Nebraska saying that's not how you say Beatrice than anything else. So people take their town names very seriously. I have absolutely learned that, and I will never mispronounce Beatrice again. I can promise.
You want to know something funny about Beatrice? That's where my mother-in-law was born and raised.
Really?
Beatrice.
Kirsten knew.
It's on my list of places to get to.
Well,
How
Joe,
is it
have you went up against that, Joe? I mean, you're a Jersey born and bred. Have you run into that at all?
Not really. Because I was already pretty familiar with so there's a place spelled Buena, and you would probably think like Lake Buena Vista, but it's actually Buna. We have our, I don't know, we have a couple of different ones. The interesting thing I will say, so I didn't grow up in South Jersey, but of course I grew up in New Jersey, was a lot of places in South Jersey don't go by like the town that you pay taxes to. So like, for example, like I used to live in a place, I would tell you I lived in Smithville. Now, Smithville's a part of Galloway Township, but you would just call it Smithville. Like you wouldn't call it your town, which I always thought was reserved for like New York City when you're saying you live on the Lower East Side or like Newark, but like people do it for like all the towns here. So that was like the one thing, the Miami thing. I'm wondering, is there a Miami or a Miami in Ohio?
In Ohio.
Yeah.
Because there's a pretty big place in Ohio.
Yeah,
It's
because
pretty big. There's a university.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Miami River there in Ohio.
It is just pronounced Miami. That was
just called Miami.
Cincinnati territory back in the day. So it is just Miami there.
While I'm on the horn with you guys, I got a question too. So where does South Texas start? Because I was like, is San Antonio South Texas?
Yeah, Matt, answer that, because I've always thought at some place it's South Texas, then it becomes deep South Texas.
Where's deep in the heart of Texas?
Well, deep South Texas is the valley. And people, that's actually a point of great contention because some people consider San Antonio Central Texas. There's really almost, you could make an argument for a South Central Texas. I like to classify San Antonio as the northern part of South Texas. It's the biggest city in South Texas. You could really say San Antonio as far as South Central Texas because you could make an argument for either. But so I throw San Antonio in Central Texas and South Texas. For the definition of South Texas, I say San Antonio is the most northern point.
Yeah, Central Texas, you start getting into like Austin and Waco.
Yeah, I'm Austin.
I
Austin.
associate San Antonio more with South Texas than Central Texas. So if you say San Antonio with Central Texas, you can't say San Antonio is Central Texas. You have to then say South Central Texas at that point. It's more South Texas.
So Houston is Central Texas.
No,
Stop it.
No, that's East Texas.
Definitely East Texas.
That's East Texas.
That's separate.
That's the Gulf Coast.
What's
I want
Laredo?
Joe to draw a map of Texas and put all the cities in there for me.
I know my Texas. I know my Texas cities. I don't know if I know my Texas geography lingo. Like, is Laredo South Texas?
Yeah,
I think of West Texas,
Yes.
but that's West Texas is probably more like
El Paso.
Odessa.
Abilene.
That kind of
Abilene's probably the easternmost point of West Texas. This is definitely West Texas.
Good.
Abilene's right on the edge. It's also one of those transition zones. Is it Central Texas? Is it North Texas? Is it West Texas? It's kind of that in between.
There's also
empty space part of Texas.
I was talking with somebody from Dallas and they say that's North Texas. I'm like, well, what do you call Amarillo and Lubbock? Well, that's the Panhandle.
Right.
Okay,
Panhandle.
sure. Fine. I'm good with that.
We could do a whole podcast episode on Texas.
Couldn't
and
we
Texas
though?
weather.
Oh my gosh.
It's a big
Maybe I'll
state.
draw a map.
I'd be
Maybe
happy
we'll
to do
do
it.
this.
Coming from
And
Texas.
none of us even live there, which is great.
Well,
I was born and raised there, and I'll always be Texas proud.
Well, I mean, some of y'all, I'm of a certain age where I remember some of the advertising for Texas, the Texas Tourism Commission. It's like, Texas, it's like a whole other country. Do y'all remember that?
It
That
is. It's
catchphrase.
They still
public.
say that.
And it's totally true. It is. Every time I've been, it's been a good time. I've been to Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Austin, although I will admit, I probably had the most fun in Austin.
Everyone does.
I had a very nice time in Austin my one time I was there. So I will echo that sentiment. All right. So I think we're good. Are we missing anything else, guys?
No, but we're looking forward to doing this again. Thanks for everybody for joining us on this ride, and we hope everybody enjoys the ride with us.
Awesome. Well, then we are going to wrap it up. We're going to wrap up our first Across the Sky podcast, brought to you by our Lee Weather team. We will be back with you in 2 weeks. We're going to have a guest. We're going to have a topic. We're going to have the whole 9 yards for you there. We'll have some good discussion too. So until then, take care, stay safe. We'll chat with you soon.
And we're clear.
Guys, I feel like we're best friends already.